Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has vowed to retaliate against the assassination of top nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. In a tweet, Khamenei said Fakhrizadeh was martyred at the hands of cruel mercenaries. Meanwhile, President Hassan Rouhani said Israel is behind the killing and Iran will retaliate at the proper time. Earlier, in a letter to the UN, Tehran warned the US and Israel against any misadventures. Afghanistan's capital city Kabul has been rocked by two simultaneous magnetic IED blasts. In a statement, Kabul police said 7 people have been wounded in both the attacks. This comes amid a dramatic increase in explosions in Kabul, specifically magnetic IED that are attached to the vehicles. In Ethiopia, the government forces have begun an offensive to capture the capital of restive Tigray region. The rebel leader Mekelle is under heavy bombardment by Ethiopian forces. Tens of thousands of people have already fled into Sudan to avoid the violence since the 4th of November. Coronavirus infections in the US have shot past 13 million, while claiming over 264,000 lives in the country. India's COVID-19 infections have topped 9.3 million, with over 41,000 new cases and 485 deaths overnight. Pakistan has registered over 3,000 cases and 45 fatalities overnight as the death toll tops 7,900. Globally, the COVID-19 death toll has exceeded 1.4 million with over 61.5 million infections. And in cricket, England beat South Africa in the first T20 of the 3-match series at Newlands, Cape Town. The visitors chased the 180-run target with 4 balls to spare and 5 wickets in hand. Johnny Bairstow was declared man of the match for his match-winning innings of 86 runs on only 48 deliveries. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has promised to retaliate against the assassination of a top nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. In a tweet, Khamenei said Fakhrizadeh was martyred at the hands of cruel mercenaries. Meanwhile, in a televised address, President Hassan Rouhani said Israel is behind the killing and Iran will retaliate at the proper time.
The Iranian president said Fakhrizadeh's assassination shows Tehran's enemies' despair and failures in hindering its scientific progress. Hassan Rouhani said terrorist acts will make Iran's scientists and endeavors more determined to continue on Fakhrizadeh's path. Earlier in a letter to UN, Iran's envoy Majid Takht warned US and Israel against any misadventures. He said Tehran reserves rights to take all necessary measures to defend its people. In a tweet, military advisor to Supreme Commander FAKHRIZADEH'S said Iran will strike as thunder at the killers of Fakhrizadeh. Meanwhile, Hezbollah said Fakhrizadeh's assassination perpetrated by America and Israel is declaration of war on Iran and the region. Iranian media claims Trump has endorsed Israel's involvement in the assassination after Trump retweeted an Israeli journalist's tweet which claimed that Fakhrizadeh was wanted by Mossad for many years. Earlier, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged restraint as tensions flared after Iran's nuclear program's assassination.
And for more on this, we are joined by Dr. Sitareh Siddiqui, political analyst, joining us from Tehran. Thank you very much for your time at Indus News. First of all, Iran has warned the US and Israel both against any adventurous measures after the killing of scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. So do you see further escalation in tensions between Washington and Tehran?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because the U.S. and the Zionist regime have given Iran every reason to show more, to escalate the tensions between the two countries. But no, because Iran acts very patiently and based on logic and long-term interest of not only its own people, but also the interest of the region. So we don't know what we are going to expect, but this won't be left without a response from Iran, because last year, in less than a year ago, Iran's top general, Sardar Soleimani, was assassinated. And now we have yet another nuclear scientist, a top physicist, assassinated, and the U.S. and Israel shamelessly and proudly take responsibility for that. This cannot be left without a response. We know that Iran is going to act, but how this is going to happen and in what manner the two countries are going to show opposition to each other and enmity to each other, this is not clear at this moment.
President Hassan Rouhani says Iran will retaliate at the proper time. Can Tehran strike Israeli or U.S. infrastructures in the Middle East as it did in Iraq after killing of General Qasem Soleimani earlier?
Well, the strike and the U.S. base in Iraq, as Iranian officials have also described it, was just a slap and not a retaliation for the assassination of a very important military figure of Iran, the top general Soleimani. So I don't think Iran has yet responded to that attack. And maybe we can expect some attacks on some Israeli base or some Israeli, military base somewhere. But we're not sure. We cannot say what Iran is going to do or what exactly they're going to target, because, as I said, Iran acts with a lot of composure and patience, and they're waiting for the proper time and the proper target to attack on. But what I know is that inside Iran, people are very angry, and it's not only sadness over losing, national figures. It's national figures, but it's also angry. A lot of rage and anger because state terrorism is happening in this region, and no international entity and neither the international community are taking any action. So if necessary, Iran would have to act on its own in order to restrain and limit the acts of terrorism that are coming from the Zionist regime and its lords in Washington.
Dr. Sitareh Siddiqui, analyst, joining us from Tehran. Thank you for your time at Indus News. Really appreciate that. And now moving on, in Iraq, the death toll from clashes between anti-government protesters and supporters of cleric Muqtada al-Sadr has risen to 6, with 60 others wounded. The violence erupted as thousands of Sadr supporters hit the streets in a show of force as the preparations ramp up for June parliamentary elections. Al-Sadr, who leads the largest bloc in Iraq's parliament, said he expects his movement to win a majority of the seats. Local authorities have sacked the city's police chief and launched an investigation into the incident, while other cities, including Kurd and Amara, introduced security measures besides curfew in Syria. Afghanistan's capital city, Kabul, has been rocked by two simultaneous magnetic IED blasts. This comes amid a dramatic increase in explosions in Kabul, specifically magnetic IED that are attached to the vehicles. In a statement, Kabul police said 7 people have been wounded in both the attacks. Police said the first blast occurred in Khair area, while the second took place at the Obed Subs township. Meanwhile, in Helmand province, a magnetic bomb blast has killed 1 man and wounded another. No group has yet claimed the responsibility of the attacks. Last week, 10 people were killed and over 50 wounded after 23 rockets hit the capital. In Ethiopia, the government forces have begun an offensive to capture the capital of the restive Tigray region. Rebel leaders say Mekelle is under heavy bombardment by Ethiopian forces. This comes after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's ultimatum for Tigray leaders to surrender expired on Wednesday. The Ethiopian military has been fighting forces in Tigray since November the 4th in order to oust the local government. The UN warns of possible war crimes in the offensive on Mekelle. Hundreds of people are believed to have been killed, while tens of thousands have fled the fighting into neighboring Sudan. At least 7 people have been killed in a suicide attack in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Police said 10 others were wounded as the blaster went off in an ice cream shop near an international airport. The Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab extremist group has claimed the responsibility for the attack. The attack comes only hours after the U.S. Acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller made unannounced visit to Mogadishu. Last week in Mogadishu, a suicide attack killed 5 people, including Somalia's military and police officials. The fresh wave of violence in Somalia has erupted after reports that U.S. plans to withdraw its military personnel from the country. On the sidelines of an OIC ministerial meeting in Niamey, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has held discussions with delegations from the UAE, Sudan, Somalia and Niger. According to the Foreign Office, Qureshi discussed ways to bolster cooperation with the respective countries. Qureshi said Pakistan attached high importance to its relations with Africa. Meeting UAE's Minister of State Areem Al-Hashmi, he highlighted difficulties being faced by Pakistani citizens with regards to the UAE visa. Qureshi underscored the need to address the issue as soon as possible. In Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, protesters have called for boycott of the District Development Council and Panchayat elections. Jammu and Kashmir People's League urged the public masses to boycott the so-called elections from the oppressor's side. In a statement, the League said casting vote is a treason with the blood of Kashmiri martyrs. It appealed to the people of occupied Kashmir to be aware and cautious of these new Indian political maneuverings. The National Conference and the People's Democratic Party have also boycotted the local body elections. In India, thousands of farmers have continued their protest in New Delhi against reforms they say are against their interests. The government has deployed hundreds of police and paramilitary forces at the capital's border. Farmers blocked the main highway in the capital and chanted anti-government slogans and raised the union's flag. They appeared ready for a long sit-in and refused to relocate the protests to another site. Earlier, police fired tear gas and water cannons to disperse the protesters, preventing them from entering Delhi. The farmers fear exploitation by corporations that will buy their crops cheaply under the new bill. They say the reforms prevent government from buying grain and wheat at guaranteed prices. Farmers are demanding the government to immediately roll back its decision, but it is still pushing the bill. A U.S. federal appeals court has dismissed a Trump campaign's lawsuit that sought to block Joe Biden's election win in Pennsylvania. A 3-judge panel ruled that charges required specific allegations and proof, none offered by Trump's lawsuit.
The Third Circuit Court of Appeals had been asked to dismiss the Trump campaign's attempts to invalidate millions of mail-in votes in Pennsylvania. Circuit Judge Stephanos Bibas, on behalf of the panel, termed free and fair elections lifeblood of democracy. Bibas said charges of unfairness were serious. But this case was without merit as no evidence was presented. In a tweet following the decision, Trump campaign lawyer Jenna Ellis said they will go to the Supreme Court. The battleground state certified Biden's win by 80,000 votes earlier this week. Meanwhile, a recount in Wisconsin demanded by Trump campaign ended, increasing President-elect Joe Biden's victory margin. The developments have dealt major blows to Trump's attempt to overturn presidential election outcome. In another development, former U.S. cybersecurity director has termed Trump's election fraud allegations farcical. In an interview, Chris Krebs said the allegations of foreign countries manipulating voting machines were baseless. Time is running out on U.S. president as the states have until December 8 to resolve election disputes.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Coronavirus infections in the U.S. have shot past 13 million while claiming over 264,000 lives in the country. India's COVID-19 infections have topped 9.3 million with over 41,000 new cases and 485 deaths overnight. Globally, the COVID-19 death toll has exceeded 1.4 million with over 61.5 million infections. More in this report.
Coronavirus situation remains grim all around the world as the holiday season is expected to propel the next wave of infections. Latin America's Peru, with one of the highest COVID-19 death rates in the world, has signed a deal with Pfizer to secure over 23 million vaccine doses for around 70% of its population. With the daily infections rising in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said majority of the country's population will be vaccinated by September next year.
We've been collaborating with the Canadian Armed Forces and their logistical abilities for a long while now, and that's why I'm so pleased to announce Major General Denis Fortin, who is going to be working closely with PHAK on logistics and delivery of this greatest mobilization effort Canada has seen since the Second World War.
Europe also continues to register devastating statistics of COVID-19 cases from all over the continent. Italy's death toll remains second highest in Europe as the country reported over 800 deaths for the second consecutive day. The virus is again on the rise in Turkey as its daily death toll hits another high for fifth consecutive day. The World Health Organization has urged countries to stay vigilant even if they see a fall in their coronavirus cases.
You've heard us say this before, but we really need to emphasize this again. Do not let your guard down. It is good to see the measures taking effect and transmission going down, but it is not time to let up. And it's time to even scale up.
Meanwhile, once Australia's COVID-19 hotspot, Victoria State has announced it has gone 29 days without detecting any new infections.
In Pakistan, 45 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to over 7,900. The Health Ministry says more than 3,000 tested positive for the disease overnight. The ministry said there are more than 46,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 392,000 countrywide cases, more than 337,000 have recovered so far. The highest number of infections are reported in Sindh with over 170,000 cases, while Punjab has reported over 117,000 cases. In the capital Islamabad, over 29,000 have been infected so far. A delegation of Indian Sikh pilgrims has arrived in Pakistan to take part in the celebrations of Guru Nanak's 551st birthday. Guru Nanak was born in Nankana Sahib in 1469. Sikhs across the world will celebrate the birth of first Sikh Guru on the 30th of November as Guru Nanak Jayanti. This year, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, Pakistan approved visas of 325 pilgrims. The first delegation of its kind since the outbreak is visiting Pakistan from November the 27th to December the 1st.
Due to the coronavirus pandemic, permission has been granted to visit only Nankana Sahib, but devotees had this desire to visit Panja Sahib, Sacha Sauda and Sri Kartarpur Sahib.
In India, a shocking video of a stray dog nibbling at the dead body of a girl inside a government hospital has led to public outrage. The girl, who died in an accident, was kept on a stretcher for post-mortem in the hospital in Uttar Pradesh. No hospital employee was there to attend the body. The family of the victim has blamed the hospital administration for negligence. At least 8 people have died in Somalia after Cyclone Gary hit country's semi-autonomous Puntland region. UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said over 42,000 people have been displaced from the region. It said Gary disrupted livelihoods by destroying fishing gear, killing livestock and flooding agricultural land and crops. UN's Food and Agricultural Agency said the flooded farmlands can further exacerbate the already worst locust plague in the country. It said the cyclone will allow the immature desert locust swarms in neighboring states to mature faster and lay eggs. Somalia's locust plague is part of a once-in-a-generation succession of swarms driven by unusual weather patterns. The U.S. authorities have launched an investigation into 115,000 Tesla vehicles. The move comes after the auto safety regulator received 43 complaints regarding front suspension's failure. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said the probe concerns a front suspension safety issue in the vehicles. The agency said the preliminary evaluation targeted 2015 to 2017 Model S and Model X vehicles. The agency said Tesla issued a service bulletin in 2017 saying a manufacturing condition can result in front suspension failure. Earlier, the agency said it was expanding a separate probe into about 159,000 Tesla Model S and Model X vehicles. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin have discussed progress in the UK-EU trade negotiations. Over a phone call, Johnson presented his commitment to reach a deal that respects the sovereignty of the country. In a statement, the UK government said the leaders reaffirmed to prioritise the 1998 Good Friday peace deal. The deal effectively ended Northern Ireland's 30 years of sectarian violence and created institutions for cross-border cooperation. Ireland's Prime Minister has said there is still time for a good result in trade talks. Meanwhile, European Union Brexit chief negotiator Michel Barnier has arrived in London for face-to-face Brexit trade talks. In cricket, England beat South Africa in the first T20 of the 3-match series at Newlands, Cape Town. The visitors chased the 180-run target with 4 balls to spare and 5 wickets in hand. South Africa managed a total of 179 runs on loss of 6 after being put into bat first. Faf du Plessis top scored for the Proteas with 58 runs on 40 deliveries. In reply, England were 3 for 34 when Johnny Bairstow came to the rescue. Bairstow was declared man of the match for his match-winning innings of 86 runs on only 48 deliveries. The second T20 of the series will be played in Paul on Sunday. Indian players will lose 20% of their match fees for a slow over rate against Australia in the first one-day international. Virat Kohli's men were found 1 over short of their target in the stipulated time and were penalised by match referee David Boone. On-field umpires Rod Tucker and Sam Nogreski, TV umpire Paul Rifle and fourth umpire Jared Abood levelled the charge. After the match, Australian Steve Smith said it was the longest 50-over game he had been part of. India lost the match by 66 runs at the Sydney Cricket Ground. The second of the 3-match 50-over series will be played at the same venue on Sunday. India is on a long tour in Australia, consisting of 3 ODIs, 3 T20s and 4 Test matches. One more member of Pakistan cricket team has tested positive for COVID-19, taking the overall infections tally to 7. 6 of the 53 members of the group had tested positive for the coronavirus upon their arrival in New Zealand. The New Zealand Cricket Board has already revoked Pakistan team's exemption to train in quarantine. It will remain on hold pending consideration by health officials, which is expected to take until next week. The first T20 is slated for the 18th of December at Auckland, while the last test will be played at Christchurch on the 3rd of January. Barcelona players and coaching staff have agreed on temporary wage cuts due to the financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The La Liga club said it expected to save around $205 million from reductions to fixed wages this season. It said the club will further save $60 million through the deferral of bonuses in the next 3 years. Last month, Barca posted a record loss of $116 million after tax for the financial year. The Spanish giants suffered a 14% revenue fall, and the club was braced for a bigger drop this season. In March, Barcelona's players agreed to take a 70% pay cut during the pandemic. The players also agreed to make additional contributions to ensure non-sporting staff received full wages. A sensational late Mohamed Magdi goal has given Al Ahly victory over Cairo rivals Zamalek in the African Champions League final. The teams were locked at 1-1 at the Cairo International Stadium when Magdi collected a loose ball and volleyed into the corner of the net. Ahly took an early lead when Amr Solia headed an in-swinging corner into the net inside the first 5 minutes. But Zamalek grew more dominant as the half wore on and Sebala scored an equalizer for them. But Magdi settled the contest with his own moment of brilliance as Ahly won the title for the first time in 7 years. The win gave them a record extending 9th African Champions League run. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.